Today's a post-processing extravaganza. We're gonna take an old favorite panorama from nearly 10 years ago, run it through DXO Pure RAW, Lightroom, Photoshop, and ON1 Photo RAW to see what we can do to improve its quality with today's modern processing. It's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. While you're watching this, I'm actually on the first workshop in forever with a fun group of people down in Brookings, Oregon. Weather's looking great. We're gonna have a new moon and spectacular foregrounds for Milky Way work. I'm really excited. I wanna put the word out quick before we jump into this editing video. It's gonna be really a treasure trove for those of you who wanna talk about post-processing this video. But first, I just wanna put the word out. September 14th, we're gonna be doing a night sky focused office hours. So sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. It's a free online collaborative live meeting. You can join via Zoom. We can all see each other's faces, or you can sign up and watch it on YouTube live. It'll be archived on YouTube. Leave a question when you sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. As always, I have a chaptered out table of contents with linkable time codes where you can jump in and look or rewatch different parts of this video that you're more interested in, along with links to everything that I currently use, an updated list of links which help me out to all the gear and stuff that I personally use and recommend. And that's always available also at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. I want to thank everybody for using those. It really helps me out. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much more as a talking head. I really want to jump in and do the edit. It's a little bit longer video this month. We're going to go through a series of panoramic captures that I did back in 2013 that were a bit underexposed and noisy. And we're gonna really look at what we can do with some of the modern new noise-specific packages out there. You know, a lot of people are talking about Topaz Denoise AI, DXO Pure RAW, ON1 No Noise AI. I really tend to like the DXO Pure RAW and ON1 No Noise. This particular video, we're gonna use DXO Pure RAW. I like the fact that those seem to be designed as front-end filters. I think of it as kind of like decanting a fine wine. You wanna open up all the possibilities in your image before you start editing it. I always think about that base noise reduction as something that I wanna do before I do any other processing so that I see what's going on with the noise in the image as I work. So we'll talk more about it as I dive in and share this edit with you. Okay, so I'm gonna set the stage here a little bit. I won't go too much into detail, except, you know, it is kind of a beautiful backstory on the creation of this image. This is an image taken up on Larch Mountain, which is one of my favorite places to photograph. And it's of Mount Hood from Larch Mountain. It's a little mountaintop you can get up to in Oregon. And this was actually taken my first time up there. I met my good friend. Well, might not have been my first time, but it was one of the early times up there 10 years ago. This is when I met Rick LePage, who many of you know through watching my videos or reading his user guides for ON1. And so beautiful night up there, and I got it in my head, you know, it looks sort of due east toward the mountain, and I wondered about a crescent moonrise, you know, just before sunrise over this mountain kind of silhouette. I had this idea for it in my head, and I started using the photographer's ephemeris to figure out when that might happen, and it was in February. So the next year in February, I was just dating my wife, Stacy, long before we had kids. She was still just as cute back then, though. And we went up there. Roads were closed quite a ways. We had to snowshoe for about, I don't know, 6-7 miles. We did it after work. We got up there kind of late. I actually looked like this, a lot less hair. And we hiked up, got up there in the dark. I found a place to set up a winter camp. That was her first time snow camping. I left her in the tent. I actually set it up in the parking lot right by where you would pay in the lot. And then I trounced through the woods without trails and pitch blackness, getting lost and almost falling off a cliff until about 2 in the morning before I finally found Shepherd's Point, the little lookout, which provides the scene for the mountain. You can see this little piece of chain link post is kind of all that saved my life that night. I was in the complete blackness, and I finally figured out, it's a long story, it's a great adventure story, but I was actually walking along and I saw that in my headlamp. If I'd taken a couple more steps, I probably could have gone off a cornice. Luckily I saw it, recognized it for what it was, found my position, marked it, went back, slept for a couple hours. It was a cloudy night actually when we went up there. There were clouds, it wasn't sunny, but it was forecast to be clear the next day. I didn't know when the transition was going to be. I knew the moon was coming up about 45 minutes before sunrise. So I got back out there and sure enough, found the moon coming up behind a silhouette Mount Hood. And I set up and created a panorama. Now this is in the days before I was doing HDR in camera, bracketed HDR. I didn't want to try to use graduated filters with a panorama. So I just shot it exposing for the sky, just thinking silhouette. And you know, sadly it's a bit underexposed with the Nikon's D800, which was a pretty new camera, new exciting camera to me at the time, 36 megapixels, but there's a lot of noise. Even at 400 ISO, if you underexpose and pull shadow detail, particularly in these clouds. And this is an old edit, you know, it's a 10-year-old edit. I've printed this large, it looks beautiful. You know, it's clean in the sky. If you walk up close on it though, I have gone through and done a whole bunch of work in layers using different noise reduction plugins for Photoshop 10 years ago and different passes, and it still looks a little noisy when you walk up close on it. So I'm excited to see, you know, what I can do with the current crop of noise reduction software. You know, I tend to like DXO Pure RAW, and I like ON1's No Noise AI. I'm not as huge a fan of Topaz denoise, which a lot of people love. I find it still creates artifacts by default for me. I like the fact that DXO tends to underdo it a little bit in which, you know, you have to think of all of these noise reduction software standalones or kits, you know, these raw noise reduction software programs as creating a new raw file that's tweaked. It's got some behind the scenes black box processing of your raw image. It's not your original raw image anymore. I can't tell you enough, I would not be doing this to all my raw images. Only the ones that really need it, like this. This is a great example. It's an 11-year-old or a 9-year-old image that's really underprocessed, you know, underexposed. And I want to go through and process each one of these. I'm going to use Pure RAW, and I'll show you how I'm going to do it. I'll say the dawn was also beautiful that morning. So let's jump in and take a look at the base files. These are the base raw files that went into the processing of that panorama. And I've got a little bit of editing. If I jump into develop, you can see I've processed them just a little bit. And you know, it's interesting that, well, you'll see. I'll show you what I'm talking about. You know, I've processed them a little bit. The raw files themselves, you know, I haven't enhanced it that much. There's noise in those shadows. But if I was to go ahead and really try to pull that noise, those shadows up, you start to see it really bloom. That's where we start to get into trouble. I'm going to undo that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up my grid of images. All right, here we go. These are the base images for the panorama. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I've put an 8-foot wide print of this up and been really happy with it, but I want to see if I can get it to where it could go even larger. So let's go ahead, open this up. I'm going to select all of these images and I'm going to export them. That's the first thing I want to do. I'm in the library module of Lightroom, and I want to go ahead and I'm going to export them. And I've got a noise reduction preset here in my exports. You know, you can always create a preset. And what I'm doing here, you can add right here. I've got noise reduction subfolder raw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export files into the exact same folder as the original image. So I don't have to go hunting for them. I'm going to put them in a subfolder called noise reduction, so I know what those are inside my folder. And I want original files. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click export. and boom, that opened up in another window on my other desktop monitor. But you can see all those along with their XMP files, and that's just bringing along those Lightroom adjustments that I had made on the file. All right, so fair enough. This is just an interesting little point. If you've done processing, it's going to come along with these files, and I think it's interesting how Pure RAW, how DXO's Pure RAW handles that. So now I'm going to go down and I'm going to fire up DXO Pure RAW. So I'm going to say Pure, there it is, Pure RAW. Boom, here it comes. And I'm going to click on Add Photos. And here in 2013 Large Mountain, there's my new folder with all of these files. I can make this bigger. I'm going to go ahead and select all of them. There's 8. Wait, didn't we say weren't there supposed to be 9? Let me just double check back in Lightroom for a second. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess I can't count. Or maybe I just misremembered. Anyway, maybe I need a little more sleep. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click Add Photos. That opens those in Pure RAW. I love this interface, and all I have to do is basically say Process Photos. And I have a different method. I really like, you can read about these. I'm a huge fan of Deep Prime. That's what I've been liking the best with DXO. It's just point and shoot. There's no settings to work with whatsoever. Output's going to be in a DNG, and I want to put a DXO folder inside the original images folder. So it's going to be inside that noise reduction folder. And I'm just going to go ahead and click the button Process. It's going to take DXO a little bit of time. You can see a progress slider on each photo as it works through, and an overall progress slider, and I'll pop back to you when it's done. It's 11:18 a.m. right now. All right, and it's 11:20 now. I saved you a couple minutes of your life by jumping away and coming back right now. So it pops up with this when it's done. You can see there's a little diamond next to each one that's processed, and you can choose to export, which is pretty cool. I'm going to have it export to Adobe Lightroom Classic. All right, so here we go. Export. We don't need to also export the raw files because they're already kind of created in there. Here this comes. Not sure why it's not wanting to add that one. Maybe I was doing some sort of a test. I'm going to turn off Do Not Import Suspected Duplicates. We want that one to import as well. I think it's probably because I was just testing and playing around before doing this video. I'm going to put a keyword in here of deep or Pure RAW. That's all. I want standard previews. Basically, I actually have a little noise reduction import dialog here, which does sort of nothing. It just adds them to the catalog. I'm going to turn off that don't suspect, import suspected duplicates. Builds a standard size preview for each one. I could also add it to our collection that we're working in here, the Mount Hood and the Moon collection. That would be a nice thing. And as I said, I could put Pure RAW and as a keyword. Done. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, hit import, and those photos should come flying into Lightroom. Here's the interesting thing. I believe, and what I'm going to do here is open up and go back to our collection, because we have the Mount Hood and Moon collection. Here's our new files. They're brought in, they look backwards because I actually captured them from right to left as I was sweeping the camera. But I believe that it brings that XMP data. Yep, see, it still brings the XMP data through. That's what I was saying was interesting about the way that Pure RAW deals with this. And I'm going to go ahead and completely reprocess this just because I have a different feel for how I do things 10 years later. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on Windows, the Option key on Mac, and that's going to get me to reset tone, reset presence. I'm going to go down to the detail slider, reset sharpening, reset noise reduction, because I'm sure I did some of that. HSL sliders, I'm going to reset luminance, all that stuff. I don't really want the tone curves standard. I'm just going through and making sure nothing is sort of over processed. The other thing you could do is go into the folder once you export it and delete all the XMP files, and then DXO wouldn't have those to bring in and apply as you're importing them. It's just interesting to me that it passes them along. Now what I want to do is select all the other images. I hit Shift and click the last one, and I'm holding down the Command or Control key for the PC. It would be Command for the Mac. And I just want to go ahead, synchronize, check all, synchronize. That way all of these are right as they were captured straight out of the camera. Okay, so now let's go ahead and process this a little bit. I'm going to actually do the blending in Photoshop. And I do want to have a look in here. It looks extremely clean. If I go boosting exposure, there's still a tiny bit of noise, but it looks much less pronounced and much less patterned as I pull up this slider. Look at that. That's pretty darned awesome. I think that's something we can just deal with in post. And now all of a sudden we can process this in new ways. So cool. I want to just do a little bit of raw processing on each image. I'm going to hold down the J key, which gives me a little map there. Or you know what I'll do? I'll just tick the highlight box as I'm adjusting white point, and I want to watch that moon. I'm starting to get a little bit of specular highlights in it, which to me, I think it's okay to have some specular highlights in the moon. We can deal with it for printing at the last stage of our process. I'll show you what I'm talking about. And then we could say, we've pulled up highlights. I actually like that for the sky. I don't want to overdo it any more than that. Let's look at shadows and pull our shadows a little bit. And I don't want to overdo that either. As I'm looking down here, pretty clean in the shadows. I'm just getting it somewhat processed. You know what I might actually do is pull overall exposure up a little bit, and then let's bring those whites and those highlights down more for the sky, and that brings out a little bit more detail in our foreground, doesn't it? I like that. There's a bit of a, there's a blue cast because the only light available is blue. It was truly blue out there. There's hardly any hint of the sunrise coming. It's sort of that blue hour gradient happening. So what's lighting the clouds is blue. And I don't want to go messing with white balance yet. I'm going to leave the sky alone. We can deal with that sort of thing later. We could warm it just slightly maybe, but I'm going to go in and sort of paint saturation out of the foreground is what I'm more likely to do a little bit later in the processing stage. What I'm really interested in is the noise reduction at this point. I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, wow. All right. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to synchronize everything after that processing. How does that look over here? Pretty amazing. All right, so coming back to our image that has the moon in it in the foreground, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look in the details. I want to really zoom in here to where I'm looking at the foreground and I see, this is one of the noisier parts of the image, which isn't terrible. And I'm going to hold down the Option key for the PC. It'd be Alt on the Mac. And that gives me sort of a black and white mask while I start working with luminance noise. You don't want to see color while you're working with luminance noise because it can actually throw you off. You're just looking at the actual luminance noise in the image. It has nothing to do with color. And that looks really pretty good to me. Wow. Barely pulling that slider at all. Let's look up on the mountain side. Nice and clean. Look at the moon. I'm going to turn off that highlight mask because it's just distracting. And I want to take a look at contrast, detail. I don't want to be creating any halos in my scene as I do my noise reduction as I recover details. So it's, kind of playing around with that slider, looking back again at the mountain's contrast edge. Looks pretty good to me. Yeah, sharpening looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and just look at the sharpening mask. This masking slider tells me what size detail am I sharpening. I want to make sure I'm not sharpening any noise with the sharpening that's going on in my scene. That actually just cleaned things up even more. It's looking really nice. All right, so turn it off. Subtle, but an improvement. Wow, so DXO did a really nice job with noise getting rid of the noise in that image just with a click there. All right, so then what's next with these somewhat processed files, I might go ahead and just back off my highlights even a little bit more and my whites just because I'm looking at the sky. Yeah, there, I like that. I want that gradient up there. Back off the overall. I really like the kind of silhouette look to this. I don't want to overdo the shadows. What I really want to do is have just a hint of the detail on the mountain. And I want to be able to bring those trees out in the foreground. And we'll do that after the fact in our panorama. So now it's really time for the panoramic merger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead. I want to make sure I've done some more work here. I want to make sure everything's synced before I think about going into Photoshop to do a panoramic merger. I'm going to make sure that, once again, I hit synchronize, I hit check all, synchronize, and then I'm going to go in and say edit in, merge to panorama in Photoshop. And I'll come back to you once all of these layers open and we get a preview in Photoshop. Well, before we get a preview, we get this this choice of how we want to handle things. I'm going to go ahead and have it do vignette removal. I am going to have it blend the images together. I don't need a distortion correction. We were shooting this with a relatively longer lens. And I'm going to have it content aware, fill transparent areas. I generally like that. You'll see what happens once we bring this up. It's all going to be layered. I could undo these things if I want to. And it's got all the files that we chose. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit OK. This is where it's going to take Photoshop a little time, and I'll come back to the result that it gives us. And boom, there we go. That took about 3.5 minutes. I will bet that back in the day, that would have taken 25 minutes on the computer I probably used back in 2013. And it didn't automatically do the content aware fill and get rid of vignetting. Wow, look at that. I'm just going to run through this before I do anything like flattening the image and getting rid of my layers. You can see the content aware fill area is in this outside selection. Wow. Looks pretty good to me. I don't know about you folks. There's a bird flying through the air right there. I want to particularly check my ridge line. Wow. I don't see any problems at all. And this is so much cleaner than the first time I did. This is exciting. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually pull I use dual monitors. So here are the layers and the whole way that it's gone through and blended the scene. And what I'm going to do is I've got a whole series of actions that I tend to run when I'm working in Photoshop. I have one that's called flatten it all. But essentially what I do is I go up to layer, flatten image. There it goes, and boom. So now, and I'll grab my tools here. I'm going to hit the way I zoomed in, by the way, was Control plus. I'm going to zoom out with Control minus, or I can see the whole image with Control 0. Boom. I'm going to grab my selection tool and click off the frame. Wow, there is our Pano. Amazing. It's about a gigabyte. Let's go ahead and save it. I'm just going to hit Control S. Boom. There we go. Incredible. And I can come back into Lightroom, and there it is. Our brand new saved Pano. And I'm just super excited. Let's jump in here and have a look at how, wow, amazing. Nice and crisp, and yet just almost no noise. That's awesome. That is really awesome. So all that's left really is to raw process this. This is just an incredible quality improvement over what I had before. You know, and I'm gonna actually take this into Photo RAW 2021 and do a little bit of processing on it. You know, the first thing I'm probably gonna do here though, just is maybe I want to just take. Do I want to? No, I don't want to mess with that sky. If I do global adjustments right now, what's really going to happen is I'm likely to mess with the sky. So what I might consider doing is just a little bit of adjustment that's more about what's happening kind of below the ridgeline. So I'm grabbing a graduated filter right here, and I'm making a pretty narrow feather. That's that line at the top and the bottom. I can run along that middle line and rotate it. It's sort of like putting a graduated neutral density filter on in the field and adjusting just the thing that's below this line. And the transition, you know, is it a soft transition or is it a harder transition? Nothing at all is applied above the line. So I don't want anything applied in the sky. And everything I'm doing is applied below the line. So I might tilt this a little bit. Where I'm really after is those clouds. And the forest down below. So I'm going to kind of bring that line up a little bit, down a little bit. And I don't want any kind of hard transition where I can see, you know, too much change. I just want to make some minor adjustments down below. I'm going to boost shadows a bit. I can pull back the blacks to create even more. Well, I don't want to do that. It's going to be a little experimentation in here. You know, you could raise the white point down below just to bring the clouds out, raise the highlights a bit just to bring those clouds out down below, while still maybe not boosting the shadows so much. I like the shadows with that tree line transition, but I still want this thing to be soft, right? I want it soft. I could warm this up just a little bit because it does feel a little blue, but if I overdo it, it's not going to blend right. You know, it looks fake. It looks too warm. We have this blue hour scene, so maybe just a hint, not too much added warmth down in there. And then, you know, let's actually take saturation and pull it back a little bit. I don't want as much blue and coloration in there. Yeah, there we go. Pull it down. I'm pulling it down a lot, actually. Let's take it down, something in that realm, just watching the image. And then we'll turn it off and have a look. Is there a line? Can I detect what I just did? Not really. That looks pretty great. You know, one other thing you can do, well, no, I'm not going to even worry about it. Well, let me talk about it really quick, though. I could activate this, and I could say I want to use a range mask, a luminance range mask. And I could show that luminance range mask. And what I could say is I want to eliminate the effects of this in the darkest shadows. So what I could do is say I want to eliminate the effect in the darker parts of the image. So where it's brighter, it's being applied more. Where it's darker, it's being applied less. As I pull the slider, you see how that works. And I can kind of adjust how quickly that transition happens with this slider. That's real slow, that's a little harder. I think that the middle tends to be a good place for that usually. Now when I turn it off, you'll see that the effect is even a little bit more subtle, right? And it lets me maybe even pull those highlights up a bit more. There you go, and I could boost shadows a little bit more without affecting the blacker parts of my image. It's a luminosity mask essentially, and now all of a sudden you can see more detail in the forest without it looking like I've done something hinky with it. There we go. That's wow, that's just awesome. And now when I look in here, none of that horrific noise that I had after tons of work when I worked on this image before, and I don't see any line. Especially that range mask actually just helped us out there. I like the amount of detail I'm seeing in the mountain if I was to go to print this. I might actually just overall back the, well, no. What I was thinking is I might actually just take my shadow detail down a little, or you know what I could do? Here we go. I know. I'm going to use my local adjustments here in Lightroom. And I'm going to turn on the auto masking. I don't want a whole bunch of flow. That's basically like opacity, essentially. I want a nice soft feather, relatively small brush. And what I'm going to do is just paint saturation down a little bit, you know, like -20, I'm guessing. I can always adjust this after the fact. And I want to paint the shadows down just a little bit on the mountain. I'm actually not wanting as much detail in the mountain and as much color. So what I'm going to do is just kind of come in here, and because I have that that slider set where I'm I've got the button clicked for auto mask. As long as I don't take that crosshair over that line to the sky, you can see I'm really just painting on sort of the section that I have in under the crosshair. So as long as I don't cross that contrast line into the sky, it's not going to affect my sky at all. And I'm just going to paint a little bit of that blue and a little bit of that detail out. I want it to be a little more silhouette on the mountain itself. And I could probably make my brush a little bit bigger actually and do this faster. Let's see, I'm going to turn off my volume so you guys don't hear any notifications in the background. And I'll go all the way along the ridge there actually, that upper section of ridge. I don't mind it on the right so much. Now if I hover over that, I'll see what I've just done. You can see how it really is masking to exactly the area I want. You know, I could go in and paint it back out of that area if I wanted to by clicking erase, but I think that's pretty good. Looking better yet to me. Yeah, less detail, less blue, not a lot, subtle. So those little subtle moves. Wow. Editing is so much better now than it was back in 2013. And now if I wanted to, I could take it into, say, Photo RAW 2021. I could go edit in Photo RAW 2021's effects. And that, I'm going to have it actually create a copy with all the Lightroom adjustments. I want it to be a Photoshop document. I want the widest color space possible, Pro Photo RGB. I'm going to send it off. I'll come back to you in Photo RAW. All right, so we got this big old file in ON1 Photo RAW's effects. And how big is it anyway? Let's have a look. Wow, 20,575 pixels by 7,550. How many megapixels is that? You know how you check that really quick? Oh, I just clicked the wrong thing. Well, we'll let my i1 profiler launch and I'll close it. Not profiling the monitor. All right, 2575 times, what were we? 7550, 7550. 155 megapixels. Pretty cool. All right, well, that little aside, let's jump in, open up my left panel, which has my presets. I'm going to go into my presets, and I'm going to go into my latest 4-season presets that I put out for ON1 this year, and go into Winter Cool. These are always a good starting point for me, and I'm going to grab the quick look preview. I can make these bigger and smaller. You know, some of them are overdone, some of them are really creative. Go in, look through. I want something subtle that just makes it pop a little bit. I kind of like that misty mountains. I still want that silhouette look. Ice blue might be adding a little too much blue. I'm gonna look in here at winter sunset. And you know, what I love about ON1's presets is that, you know, let's say you're using presets from someone like me. You can jump in and reverse engineer them just by turning off every filter in this stack and then customize them for your own image. So I'm going to close that panel so I get a bigger view. And I'm going to look at these individually, one by one. HDR look is going to brighten the shadows and darken the highlights a little bit. It does that largely with a compression slider. And I don't want to be reducing detail at all in this image. This compression slider kind of does a lot of the work here. You know, you can turn it up and down. I'm going to turn it down a little bit on this image, and I don't necessarily want it to be boosting shadows quite as much as it is in this particular image. So I'm going to turn that down a little bit. And then the neat thing with Photo RAW is if I want to take it down even another notch, I can go in and mask right here. And I could say, you know, I want to paint in, I want to mask at, say, a 37% or 30% opacity, take out about a third. I'm painting out. I want 100% feather so it's nice and soft. And I'm just gonna make my brush about that size. And I just want to kind of paint some of that brightness out of these trees that's being added by this filter. It's real subtle what I'm doing here. And again, we're only doing 30% opacity, changing on each brush stroke, painting out that filter's effect. Now when we turn it on, turn it off, it's doing a lot less to those trees than it was before. All right, so now we'll jump in here, have a look at what the tone enhancer is doing. Turn it off, turn it on. It's really just let's see. I think it's adding a little contrast, which is fine. It's brightening the shadows a little bit. I'm going to turn that down a touch. Dropping the blacks a hint. Just that boost in contrast. It's a nice touch. Real subtle. Real subtle. All right. Then dynamic contrast. That just tends to add a little bit of sharpness to edges. I want to look at the most important edges in my frame and make sure it's not doing anything that I don't want. It's not creating halos. See, there's a little bit of haloing going on there in the moon. So what I'm going to do, again, what I can do, same thing we just did before, is I'm going to grab, I don't even think it will show up when we do it on the overall mask, but I want to paint out at 100% just around this moon. I'm just going to wipe that filter's effect away from our moon. I don't want to create any weird contrast line. And then I want to have a look down here. Again, I'm zoomed in and make sure it's looking okay on the mountain's edge. There's a bit of a contrast. Let me turn, is that happening right here? There's a rim light. Yep, but the dynamic contrast is making that line a little more dramatic than I might want. So I can choose. I can either back the whole effect off a little bit. Well, you know, here we are. Hold on. Let me close down this. So I'm using a pretty subtle touch. It's just adding a little bit of contrast to small edges, medium edges, large edges. You know, I could back off the large edges a little bit. This is a pretty big contrast line. And then it's probably having less of an effect. Yeah, there we go. Still a little, but that's just great. That just looks rimlit. Just by turning down those large contrast edge in a scene like this. I could also have gone in and painted that effect out of that large contrast edge. But it's just going to add a little pop, a little sharpness to our image kind of throughout, having it on, just subtle. Yeah, you know, by the time we turn off, maybe just we'll add just a little bit back in. It's a scene like this with such a dramatic contrast edge that I want to be careful about. I'm going to get out of here, jump back in, turn it off, turn it back on. I see it more in the trees. That line with the trees looks great, the cloud line. All right, so the big thing we want to worry about is that high contrast edge doesn't get a halo. And that's looking really good. I just want to always zoom into 100% and make sure that the editing I'm doing isn't doing anything terrible to the contrast edges in my image. You get that haloing effect and it looks edited, and I do not want that. All right, so then finally, we're going to go into the color enhancer here, turn it on, and have a look at what it's doing to the image. A little more than I want, a little too much punch and contrast. If I have a look here, you can adjust each individual color, what's happening with those colors here. And I think that the blue saturation's up a little high, and the brightness is turned down way too low. I'm going to bring it back up for a more natural kind of look. It's just darkening the blues a little too much in our scene. There we go. That's looking way better. And then if we go in, the oranges in our scene have been pulled just a smidge further towards red than I might want. There's times when I really want that. This scene, they're pretty red as it is. I want to, you know, it's kind of balancing those oranges between yellow and red with the hue line here. And I probably want to back the saturation off just a little. I'm going for that natural look. We can look at yellows in our image. They're being pulled a little towards the orange from green. We can back that saturation off a smidge too. Now when I take a look at it, it looks more natural to me. We can go down ahead and close this panel down and get a nice big look at it in Photo RAW. That looks really good. If I go ahead and hit the preview button, subtle, but it adds pop, color, and tonal contrast that I'm after. Really subtle. This is a subtle business that we're working at here. And I'll probably come back to this and rework it a few times. And when I go to print it huge, I'm going to rework it a couple of times. But the amazing part is just how much better quality I've got in my printability of this image. I'm going to go ahead and hit done. That's going to round trip me back into Lightroom to finish this whole thing up. And what I really want to do fast once this saves and gets in there, this is a huge file, it's about 1 gigabyte, is have a look at my edit from years ago, and I'll look at this edit, and you know, it probably, again, like I said, you know, I don't just sit down in one sitting with an image this big and this important. I'll come back to it, I'll refine it, I'll do some more really nuanced local adjustments. I'll probably do a little burning and dodging and some color and contrast local adjustments in Lightroom and Photoshop. But I want to have a look at just the overall quality difference and printability of this versus the original file. All right, so here we are back in Lightroom, and looking at my edit from 9 years ago, you can see I've really brightened the clouds up and taken the saturation out of them. Let's just quickly jump in and do that move. I'm just going to use Lightroom's local adjustment brush. I'm going to click on that local adjustment brush. I'm going to boost exposure a couple of stops, and I'm going to take saturation way, way down. And I've got, again, you know, auto mask turned on, flow, let's, you know, make it 30% or so. I'm just going to kind of paint. You know, this isn't necessarily going to be the end all and be all. I may do this with some more precision before we actually go to, say, print this thing. But, you know, why not? Let's do a little more apples to apples analysis here. I'm going to do a little bit of dodging and burning for y'all. You know, these kinds of files you work on and work on and work on. The important thing to me is, you know, how much ability do I have to print this? And again, I've got that auto mask turned on, so as long as I don't cross into the trees, I shouldn't be desaturating and brightening the trees more than I want. I do want to get that section of cloud right there. There we go. Really working these clouds right here. That's what it's all about. Subtle, but yeah, we're starting to kind of bring those in line with the old edit, so we can really compare more apples to apples. How much denoise have we done on these clouds? I'm going to bring it up some more. Bring it up some more. How much latitude do we have? Let's keep it going. You know, I'd probably bust out my Wacom tablet, do this potentially in Photoshop, where I have a little more masking control. But there you go. I'd add a new brush here where it doesn't do the exposure thing. Maybe just a little bit, and not turn saturation down as much. And maybe I'll brighten the trees in the foreground just a little bit and desaturate them a touch too. Right, like so, like that. And then I might add one more new brush, and I would say, and you can always go in and adjust these to taste. So as I hover over this, you can see what each one's doing here. I might do one more where I actually darken things up a little bit and don't do much at all with exposure, and just kind of darken in here a little tiny bit, because it seems like I might have brightened that a little alongside the cloud in the forest, and I want that to really stand out. There we go. And then, you know, let's also, what the heck, as long as we're doing all this, let's turn exposure down a little bit and saturation way down on the mountain itself, like so, and that upper ridge line, because I like that contrast that I had in the original. And this is all just real quick work. Some quick finish edit work going on here. We're just darkening that. Don't want to hit the clouds, particularly right in there. Oh, don't want to hit the sky. Don't want to hit the clouds, but we want to really have that crazy silhouette mountain look that we're after. I want to go in that area right there, like so. Yeah, we're looking a little more apples to apples now. Turn that off. So, you know, here's our past. It's still even more dramatic, but you know, here's what we've got in the new file. Let's see what that noise processing in Pure RAW did for us. Wow. really is something. You know, there's a hint of noise in there that's coming out as we really start to boost it. But then again, you know, we can jump in and we could say, let's have a look here, see if we can get rid of a little bit more noise in there. Something like so. Still, it's nothing compared to what we were dealing with before. And as we look at detail, bring some of that detail back. There's clearly some wind in the trees that we're dealing with. But my gosh, you know, again, look at sharpening for the trees and look at masking to get rid of some of that noise and the sharpening. Whew. Look at that. Are we still looking good on our other edges? Pretty fantastic. How's our moon look? Good. Wow. Amazing. I can tell that as I work with this image, I'm going to have the ability to do lots more with it with our modern processing. Fun stuff. And you know, jumping back in here and looking at my old edit from 2013, and you know, not only its amount of noise, but just the fact that it's maybe a little over processed, you know. The clouds aren't going to look that bright in these conditions. And then coming back to what we've got from those same files, having run it through this modern denoising, demosaicing kind of pre-filter that I think of as DXO Pure RAW or ON1's No Noise AI, I think that these pieces of software can really work on these files that have problems, you know, that you may have captured underexposed with sensors that have worse performance and noise. I mean, that's just a pretty amazing difference. And it enables a more nuanced process that's really going to give you the ability to print it larger and walk right up on it without having that obvious kind of digital noise problem that comes with bringing shadow detail up, you know, with older images like this. Pretty exciting stuff. Again, I would not use those sort of pre-filters like DXO Pure RAW or ON1 No Noise on all my images. Only ones that have pretty serious shadow noise problems. Maybe you underexposed them. Maybe it's an old sensor that didn't have as good a noise performance. And you know, create a new file. Don't junk your original RAW file, because this is doing black box processing behind the scenes and creating something new and different that isn't your original file out of the camera. I always say, let's keep those original files sacrosanct. You know, I wouldn't say I'm done editing this image. I'm probably going to go through and do some more fine-tuned processing. You know, I see some issues around here. I want to make this ridge line in the foreground stand out more and put that more into the background, and also drop these snowfields on the ridge line to a little more silhouette like they are on the right. I'll probably play with the colors a little bit, but I know I can. And you know, this just low level of noise going on in here. Wow. And the natural look to the clouds because of that, I just love. I'm excited about it. All right, so hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you learned a little something from the process. It's new, it's different, it's cool, and it's possible.